For centuries, the narrative of human existence has been neatly filed away under the heading of Darwinian evolution. It is a slow, methodical march across millennia, a gradual climbing of the biological ladder, moving relentlessly from primordial ooze to the complex brilliance of the modern mind. We are taught, with the certainty of scientific decree, that we are the result of natural selection, that our emergence was merely a statistical inevitability shaped by the pressures of survival on a volatile planet. This is the bedrock of Western scientific understanding, the comforting tale that places us firmly in the driver's seat of history, products of accident, not design. But what if that bedrock is fractured? What if the most profound leap in our development, the sudden, almost inexplicable cognitive explosion that birthed civilization, was not natural at all, but artificial? What if the timeline is wrong? The missing links not simply missing, but entirely skipped? We're talking about a concept so revolutionary, so inherently challenging to the academic establishment, that merely uttering its name in certain university halls can invite ridicule. Yet the evidence for this alternate history lies not in fringe speculation, but carved deeply into the oldest surviving written records of human civilization, the Sumerian clay tablets. These artifacts, excavated from the scorching deserts of Mesopotamia, whisper a truth that science refuses to hear, the truth of the Anunnaki. The name itself, Anunnaki, translates roughly from Sumerian as those who from heaven to earth came. Indeed, they were not spectral deities or abstract concepts of nature. They were described meticulously and repeatedly as flesh and blood beings, technological travelers who arrived on Earth for a specific, resource-driven purpose. Their existence, if accepted, doesn't just tweak the evolutionary theory, it outright dismantles it, suggesting that our species, Homo sapiens, is not the final product of millions of years of random mutation, but rather the result of a deliberate, sophisticated genetic engineering project initiated by an extraterrestrial race millennia ago. Before we dive deeper into this ancient mystery, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of the evidence we uncover next. To truly grasp the scale of this defiance, one must first appreciate the established timeline. Standard evolutionary biology posits that Homo sapiens developed their complex cognitive abilities, abstract thought, language, symbolic reasoning, over hundreds of thousands of years, emerging slowly from earlier hominids like Homo erectus and Neanderthals. Then, suddenly, around 6,000 years ago, civilization exploded in Sumer. Writing, metallurgy, sophisticated astronomy, advanced mathematics, and complex social structures seemingly appeared overnight, fully formed. This sudden acceleration, this dramatic spike in intellectual capacity with no clear transitional phase in the archaeological record, is the first great anomaly that standard theory struggles to explain convincingly. It is this very anomaly that the Anunnaki narrative claims to resolve. They didn't just influence civilization, they created the intelligent species capable of building it. Imagine standing in a modern genetics laboratory, surrounded by blinking lights and complex sequencing machinery. Now, transport that image back to a dusty, primordial Earth, perhaps 450,000 years ago. That is the alleged scene of the greatest intervention in planetary history. The Anunnaki, specifically the brilliant chief scientist Enki and the medical officer Ninhursag, allegedly undertook the task of mixing their own advanced DNA with that of the primitive hominids already roaming the planet. The goal was not benevolence, nor philosophical enlightenment. The goal was labor. They needed a robust, intelligent yet manageable workforce to mine the vast quantities of gold they required for their own planetary survival, a need we will explore in devastating detail shortly. This entire framework, the extraterrestrial arrival, the genetic manipulation, The sudden birth of civilization is largely attributed in modern times to the pioneering and highly controversial work of the late scholar Zecharia Sitchin. Sitchin, fluent in ancient Sumerian and Akkadian, spent decades translating the thousands of surviving clay tablets, arguing that they were not allegorical myths, but historical accounts of events that actually transpired. His translations brought the story of Nibiru, the Anunnaki's home planet, and the epic figures of Enki, Enlil, and Ninhursag vividly to life, detailing a cosmic drama that reshapes our entire perception of reality. The academic rejection of Sitchin's work has been nearly universal, yet the public fascination endures, precisely because his narrative fills the gaping holes left by conventional archaeology. If we are to proceed on the premise that these ancient texts record true events, we must consider the sheer technical difficulty of the Anunnaki's claimed achievement. To take a relatively primitive hominid, accelerate its neurological development, implant complex linguistic structures, and impart the capacity for abstract reasoning in a single controlled generation demands a level of genetic mastery that modern science is only beginning to touch upon. It is a biological miracle, but a manufactured one. This is the knowledge that truly defies evolution, the knowledge that the creators of life themselves were here, using Earth as a vast laboratory, fundamentally altering the trajectory of the dominant species. The implications ripple outward, affecting everything from theology to physics. If we were engineered, who were our designers? And more chillingly, what responsibilities do those designers still hold over their creation? As we delve deeper into the specific accounts of the Anunnaki's arrival and their ultimate terrifying goal, the line between myth and documented history becomes increasingly blurred, forcing us to ask, what if the oldest stories are also the most literal? This introductory challenge to the established order serves as our starting point. We begin by questioning the smooth narrative of natural selection and pointing directly to the abruptness of the Sumerian emergence. It is a narrative contradiction wrapped in a geological mystery, a riddle whose answer is etched in cuneiform. The world we think we understand, the product of countless slow changes, is perhaps merely a stage set by visitors from beyond the solar system. Visitors who saw potential, or more accurately, saw utility, in the raw materials of Earth's primitive life forms. This perspective fundamentally changes the definition of human uniqueness. We are not unique because we ascended naturally. We are unique because we were chosen or perhaps selected for a particular highly demanding role. If this beginning has already made you rethink what you knew about human history and the origins of life, imagine what revelations lie ahead. So go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel right now, because here, every video unearths secrets that few institutions have the courage to display. Join us as we track the Anunnaki's journey from a distant celestial body to the dust of ancient Earth and witness the deliberate crafting of our genetic blueprint. The foundation of the Anunnaki hypothesis rests on the meticulous deconstruction of the Sumerian tablets, which Sitchin translated not as mythopoetic fables intended to explain the weather or the seasons, but as detailed, if often dramatic, historical records. The prevailing archaeological view dismissed these accounts, labeling the figures of Enki, Enlil, and Ishtar as standard polytheistic deities, projections of human fears and desires onto the natural world, much like the Greek pantheon. But Sitchin, and those who follow his work, argue that the descriptions of these beings were too consistent, too grounded in physical descriptions, and too precise in their knowledge of astrophysics to be mere fantasy. The Anunnaki's home planet, known in the tablets as Nibiru, is central to the entire saga. The Sumerians described Nibiru as a large celestial body, often referred to as the 12th planet, if one includes the Sun and Moon, traveling on a vast elliptical orbit that takes it far beyond Pluto. only to return to the inner solar system every 3,600 Earth years, a period known as the Shah. This description of a planet with a long orbital period intersecting the paths of the inner planets defies conventional planetary mechanics as currently accepted. Yet the Sumerians, without telescopes or sophisticated mathematical models, charted its path with astonishing clarity. How could a civilization, just emerging from the Stone Age, possess such intimate knowledge of trans-Neptunian objects? The only logical answer, according to the hypothesis, is that the knowledge was imparted by those who traveled on that planet. The tablets describe Nibiru facing an ecological catastrophe. Its atmosphere was thinning, jeopardizing the survival of its inhabitants. The solution, determined by the Anunnaki scientists, was a desperate Hail Mary attempt, suspending fine particles of gold dust high in their atmosphere to act as a reflective barrier, stabilizing the planet's heat and preventing the catastrophic dissipation of life-sustaining gases. This is where Earth enters the narrative. Earth, they discovered during one of Nibiru's periodic close approaches, was exceptionally rich in gold, particularly in the deep, ancient cratons of Africa. The first landings are detailed with the clinical precision of a logbook. The narratives describe massive, fiery rockets, or celestial boats, descending through Earth's humid, thick atmosphere, finally settling down in the marshlands of the Persian Gulf, a region the Anunnaki designated the Eden, which later became known as the biblical Eden. The very texture of the air, the scent of the sulfur, the sound of the alien craft settling heavily into the mud, all are described, grounding the arrival in physical reality rather than divine visitation. The commander of this initial expedition was Enki, the highly skilled scientist and engineer, often depicted as the patron god of wisdom and water. His half-brother, Enlil, the military commander and strict authoritarian, arrived soon after and assumed command of the overall operation. The rivalry between these two powerful figures, Enki, the sympathetic creator, and Enlil, the harsh disciplinarian, would become the underlying tension throughout human prehistory, shaping events from the creation of humankind to the devastating global flood. The crucial point here, the reason this narrative so fundamentally clashes with evolutionary science, is the motive. The Anunnaki did not come to Earth to watch evolution unfold. They came for a strategic mineral. Their perspective on Earth was purely utilitarian. They saw resources and later, labor potential. This places a technologically superior, genetically advanced race in the role of colonial exploiters, a position that entirely sidesteps the concept of humanity as a naturally occurring pinnacle of biological advancement. We were, quite simply, a means to an end. Think about the sheer audacity required to launch an inter-system expedition for a single element. It speaks volumes about the level of desperation and the magnitude of their technological capabilities. They navigated vast stretches of space, understood the intricate chemistry required to fix their own atmosphere, and yet they were still bound by a simple biological imperative: survival. This duality, godlike technology coupled with very mortal needs, is what makes the Anunnaki stories so compellingly real. They were not omnipotent beings. They were technologically advanced beings facing an existential threat. As we move into the actual operations, we must focus on the environment of Earth 450,000 years ago. It was a rugged, dangerous world. The Anunnaki personnel, known as the Igigi, the Watchers, who manned the mines, were highly trained, but the work of extraction was brutally hard, conducted under the harsh African sun, deep within the Abzu, the region later identified with gold-rich southern Africa. The isolation, the intensity of the manual labor, and the extremely long Shah cycle, meaning they were stranded on Earth for thousands of years between opportunities for easy return, all contributed to a growing unrest among the worker Anunnaki. The detailed descriptions of the mining tools, The methods of smelting and the logistics of transporting the raw gold back to the processing centers in Mesopotamia are astonishing for texts supposedly written by primitive farmers. The tablets talk about specialized machinery, about firestones, possibly nuclear or powerful energy sources, and about the use of sound waves and vibrational technology to loosen ore from the bedrock. These are technical concepts that align more closely with 20th and 21st century engineering than with the presumed capabilities of 4000 BC Sumer. The complexity of the task inevitably led to resentment. The Igigi, tasked with the backbreaking excavation, began to question their purpose. They were highly advanced beings, yet they were performing the deepest, most dangerous physical labor required for their planet's survival. This tension, the conflict between command and labor, is the inevitable precursor to the greatest turning point in human history, the creation of the Lulu, the primitive worker. This entire context, the mineral need, the technological superiority, and the subsequent labor crisis, is the essential framework that must be understood before we discuss the actual genetics. Without the crisis of the Igigi, there would have been no need for Homo sapiens. Our existence, therefore, is not a glorious ascent, but an industrial solution to a very specific labor problem faced by interstellar colonists. This concept strips away all religious dogma and replaces it with cold, hard logistics, challenging every established belief system rooted in a purely divine, non-physical creation. Think about the implications for anthropology. If Sitchin is correct, the out-of-Africa theory still holds true, but the mechanism is wildly different. The crucible of human development was indeed Africa, but not due to natural advantage. It was the location of the Anunnaki's primary gold extraction sites. Our genesis is tied directly to the value of a noble metal on a distant planet. If you arrived here without pausing, it's because this cosmic tale of mineral desperation and genetic engineering has deeply resonated with you. So, strengthen this content now. Hit the like button and share this with someone who needs to see the real story behind evolution. Your engagement ensures we keep uncovering these deep, unsettling truths. The breaking point arrived with dramatic fury, etched forever in the tablets known as the Atrahasis epic. The Anunnaki laborers, the Igigi, had toiled under the harsh command of Enlil for thousands of years. The heat of the African mines, the constant pressure to deliver the requisite gold ore, and the sheer monotony of their existence finally overwhelmed their discipline. They had reached their limit. The air in the deep mine shafts was thick with dust and resentment. The sounds of drills and the clanging of metal were slowly replaced by the murmurs of mutiny. The environment itself contributed to their deteriorating morale. The air, thick with the scent of ozone and heated earth, offered no respite. The Igigi were accustomed to the temperate atmosphere of Nibiru, not the unforgiving extremes of a younger Earth. Their suits, designed to protect them, became prisons of heat and sweat. Every sunrise brought the crushing realization that another Shah, 3,600 years, was needed before relief or a permanent return journey could be considered, and yet the gold had to be delivered continuously. The rebellion began not with a grand battle, but with a silent, coordinated protest. One morning the Igigi downed their tools. The silence in the Abzu was deafening, a sound that signaled not peace, but impending war. They burned their instruments, threw down the heavy baskets of ore, and marched en masse toward the command center, where Enlil maintained his stern watch. Enlil, the commander, viewed the rebellion with cold fury. He was a being defined by order, discipline, and absolute adherence to the mission objective. The Igigi's actions were not merely insubordination, they were a threat to the survival of Nibiru itself. He ordered the mutineers to be apprehended and punished, perhaps even executed, setting the stage for an inter-Anunnaki conflict that could have easily destroyed the fragile operations on Earth. The Igigi, however, were prepared. They surrounded Enlil's command post, their numbers swelling, their determination fueled by years of repressed rage and fatigue. The standoff was a moment of true crisis, a scene that would have looked terrifyingly similar to a modern military siege. Only the participants were beings of immense power and advanced weaponry. The dust swirled around their feet, kicked up by the tense silence, punctuated only by the heavy breathing of the weary workers. It was at this critical juncture that the elder statesman of the Anunnaki, the High Council, intervened. Recognizing the legitimacy of the Igigi's grievances and the impossibility of enforcing labor through violence, the council sought a third way. They had a technical problem. Gold had to be mined. They had a sociological problem. The existing workforce refused. The solution, proposed by Enki, was both audacious and elegant, creating a proxy worker, a genetically modified slave species capable of performing the arduous manual labor without the intellectual capacity for organized rebellion. Enki, whose domain was science and creation, stepped forward with the proposal. He argued that Earth already hosted suitable raw materials, the primitive hominids. These creatures, while clumsy and lacking in true self-awareness, possess the basic physiological structure, the musculature, and the endurance necessary for the mining operations. All they needed was a spark, the imprint of the Anunnaki, to accelerate their intelligence just enough to understand instructions, operate tools, and organize simple tasks. This was the pivotal decision that fundamentally altered the course of Earth's biology. It meant deliberately intervening in the natural evolutionary progression, bypassing millions of years of random chance and survival of the fittest selection through a targeted, laboratory-controlled procedure. It was genetic engineering on a planetary scale, a project so ambitious that it dwarfs any ethical or scientific undertaking in human history. The chief medical scientist, Ninhursag, known as Ninti, Lady of Life, was tasked with overseeing the genetic manipulation. The texts describe a lengthy, painstaking process of trial and error, a biological marathon that required isolating the essential genetic components of the Anunnaki, the source of their superior intellect and longevity, and splicing them with the DNA extracted from the existing hominids, likely a species comparable to Homo erectus or early Neanderthal. The challenge was immense. It was not enough to simply combine the DNA. They had to ensure compatibility, manage the instability, and crucially, program specific limitations into the new species. The Lulu, or the mixed one, needed to be smart enough to serve, but not smart enough to question the service. They needed to be fertile and self-propagating, ensuring a renewable workforce, but they could not be fully Anunnaki, thus maintaining the clear hierarchical distinction. The Anunnaki facility, described in the tablets as the House of Shimti, the house where the breath of life is fixed, became the first terrestrial genetics lab. Imagine the scene: advanced medical equipment, glowing vials, the smell of sterile compounds mingling with the earthy odor of primitive biological samples. Ninhursag, the chief geneticist, worked tirelessly, experimenting with different combinations, often using her own ovum, according to some translations, to provide the vital spark of Anunnaki compatibility. The early attempts were failures. The texts describe creatures that were too weak, too deformed, or too short-lived to be useful. It was a brutal process of biological refinement. The narrative is unflinching in detailing the suffering and the rejection of these failed prototypes. But finally, after intense scientific focus and, according to the accounts, a desperate plea for divine guidance, a moment of profound irony given that they were the gods, they achieved success. The product was the first Homo sapiens, the Adamu, or one who is of the earth. The descriptions of this first genetically accelerated human are specific: standing upright, covered in less hair than their predecessors, and possessing a cranial capacity far exceeding the natural evolutionary curve. Most importantly, they possess the ability to articulate simple instructions and perform complex, repetitive tasks, perfectly suited for the deep, dark minds of the Abzu. This single act of genetic engineering, driven entirely by an industrial need, is the central pillar that defies all conventional evolutionary theory. Darwinian evolution demands incremental change driven by environmental selection. The Anunnaki narrative provides instantaneous, targeted change driven by colonial selection. The shift from Homo erectus to Homo sapiens was not a slow geological process. It was a quick, necessary project executed in a sterile lab under high pressure. This means the defining characteristic of humanity, our unique intellect, is not an accident of nature, but a deliberate genetic inheritance from the stars. If you have stayed with us through the labor crisis and the dramatic inception of human life in an extraterrestrial laboratory, it is clear that this documentary has captured your mind. This is not casual viewing. This is a pursuit of historical truth. Take a moment to comment below with your thoughts on the Igigi rebellion. Do you sympathize with the workers? And please, strengthen this content. Curte agora and send it to someone who needs to question the accepted narrative of creation. The successful creation of the Lulu, the first genetically modified worker, marked the transition from biological experimentation to massive industrial deployment. The African gold mines, the Abzu, quickly became the primary theater of human activity. The very purpose of early human existence was to extract the life-saving element required by the Anunnaki. It was a functional slavery, orchestrated with cold, logistical efficiency. The environment of the mines was hellish. The Anunnaki engineers, under the direction of Enlil and the oversight of Enki, implemented a system of total control. The Lulu were strong, obedient, and required minimal maintenance beyond basic sustenance and housing. Their physical traits were perfectly tailored for the work: superior lung capacity, robust musculature, and crucially, an intelligence that functioned primarily on execution rather than independent thought or philosophical questioning. They were the ideal biological automaton. The narrative of the Anunnaki tablets details the sheer volume of gold extracted. It was an industrial operation of immense magnitude, dwarfing anything Earth would see again until the modern industrial revolution. The gold, once mined deep within the Earth, was transported via complex logistical routes, described as sky ships and water wagons, back to the processing and smelting centers established in Mesopotamia, the heartland of the Anunnaki's Eden. The initial batches of Lulu were sterile, a planned precaution to prevent overpopulation and loss of control. Ninhursag and Enki maintained absolute authority over reproduction, ensuring that the supply of workers remained precisely tailored to the demand of the mines. However, the operational reality of managing a workforce across thousands of years eventually necessitated a shift in strategy. The Anunnaki grew tired of the constant cycle of lab-based cloning and reproduction. They preferred a self-sustaining population. This transition from controlled creation to independent propagation represents the first major ethical debate among the Anunnaki. A debate that mirrors many of the existential and moral questions we face today regarding genetic modification and artificial intelligence. Should the creation be granted the ability to reproduce independently? Enki, often portrayed as the more sympathetic and protective of the Lulu, argued for it, citing the logistical nightmare of manual replenishment. Enlil, the militaristic pragmatist, vehemently opposed it, fearing the inherent loss of control and the risk that a self-propagating species might eventually evolve beyond their intended limitations. Enki prevailed, and Ninhursag introduced the second critical genetic modification, fertility. This act, described as the Anunnaki opening the womb, ensured the survival and expansion of the Homo sapiens species. It was the moment that the Adamu transitioned from being controlled lab specimens to becoming a truly biological species, capable of charting its own demographic destiny, even if that destiny was still dictated by the Anunnaki's needs. The tablets describe this period as the Eden experience, but it was far from a paradise of innocence. It was a highly managed, agriculturally subsidized environment designed to support the mining operation. The humans were taught basic farming and animal husbandry, skills necessary to feed the workforce, but they were kept intellectually sequestered, primarily focused on their demanding labor. The tree of knowledge references in later religious texts are interpreted by Sitchin's followers as the Anunnaki's reluctance to impart all their scientific knowledge, fearing that true enlightenment would lead to a second, far more dangerous rebellion, a rebellion of the mind. The rapid spread of the newly fertile humans began to present complex social challenges for the Anunnaki rulers. The Anunnaki, being immortal, or at least possessing lifespans measured in hundreds of thousands of Earth years, maintained an aloof distance, residing in their technologically advanced cities and command centers, while the humans toiled below. Yet proximity eventually led to interaction that crossed the established boundaries. The tablets reveal instances of the Anunnaki male members, particularly the younger Igigi who remained on Earth, engaging in procreation with the female Homo sapiens. This union, often mentioned in texts that would later form the basis of the Book of Genesis, the sons of God taking the daughters of men, resulted in a hybrid offspring, the Nephilim. These Nephilim, described as giants or heroes of old, possessed increased physical prowess and perhaps a higher degree of Anunnaki intellect, but they were still distinct from their pure-blood ancestors. This development was highly destabilizing. It blurred the lines of authority and purity, infuriating the rigid Enlil. The creation of these hybrid bloodlines posed an immense threat to the Anunnaki's carefully constructed hierarchy. It was a sign that control was slipping and that the engineered workers were acquiring attributes, intellectual and physical, that were never intended for them. The implications for evolutionary theory here are profound. If these accounts are literal, then humanity is not a single lineage defined by gradual natural selection, but a composite species born from a deliberate act of genetic hybridization between two wildly different biological entities. Our current understanding of our own genetic makeup, the 23 pairs of chromosomes versus the 24 found in other great apes, takes on a chilling new significance. Mainstream science attributes this difference to a random fusion event in our primitive past. The Anunnaki hypothesis suggests it is the definitive signature of the lab, the deliberate editing of the genome performed by Ninhursag to limit but accelerate the species. The sheer speed of cognitive development in Sumer, where these early, fertile humans rapidly formed complex societies after the mining phase, further supports the interventionist theory. If this is already making you question what you thought you knew, hit the like button so this investigation reaches more people. Where did they acquire the knowledge of sophisticated architecture, the precise calculation of the lunar cycle, or the ability to smelt and alloy metals? This knowledge was not discovered slowly. It was downloaded by the Anunnaki to the earliest, most favored human rulers, setting the stage for the first city-states. The tension between the created and the creators was now palpable. The humans were proliferating, learning, and their existence was becoming a nuisance to the strict agenda of Enlil, who saw the whole project spinning out of his control. This simmering conflict would soon reach a terrifying crescendo, triggered by an impending cosmic event that would redefine the Anunnaki's relationship with their creation forever. The complexity of these ancient documents proves they are more than mere folklore. If you're still with us, contemplating the genetic origins of the Lulu, comment below if you believe this interventionist theory is more compelling than gradual evolution. Your engagement is critical to revealing these deeper paradigm-shattering truths. Like this video and share it immediately. The period immediately following the successful self-propagation of Homo sapiens saw the rise of the Sumerian civilization, a phenomenal, almost instantaneous leap from hunter-gatherer existence to sophisticated urban life. This abrupt emergence is perhaps the single most potent piece of evidence cited by proponents of the Anunnaki hypothesis. Imagine the transition speed. Within a few hundred generations, humans went from being programmed miners to masters of irrigation, law, astronomy, and complex mathematics. Conventional archaeology attributes this burst of innovation to geographical necessity, the Fertile Crescent providing the perfect conditions for agriculture and the slow accumulation of knowledge. But the sheer breadth and depth of Sumerian knowledge suggests something far more dramatic than self-discovery under favorable conditions. They didn't just invent writing, they invented cuneiform, a complex, precise system capable of detailed historical and mathematical notation. They didn't just look at the stars, they mapped the precessional cycles of the equinoxes, an astronomical feat requiring observation over vast periods of time, and they possessed uncanny knowledge of the outer planets, including Uranus and Neptune, which modern science only confirmed with telescopes centuries ago. How could a society, utilizing rudimentary tools, achieve a level of astronomical and mathematical sophistication that seems temporally displaced by thousands of years? The answer, according to the tablets, is direct tutoring by their creators. Once the gold mining operation was relatively stable and the logistics of transporting the ore back to Nibiru's orbit were established, a process that involved massive temporary staging platforms in the ancient Near East, the Anunnaki shifted their focus to governance and mentorship. Enlil and Enki and their respective progeny took on the roles of patrons and rulers of the various burgeoning city-states. Uridu Lagash, these centers of civilization were not organically developed tribal settlements. They were meticulously planned urban centers, complete with laws, specialized trades, and highly organized religious, i.e. Anunnaki-focused, hierarchies. The Anunnaki essentially served as visible physical gods, teaching the favored human proxies how to govern, build, and crucially, how to maintain the logistical structure that supported the continuing gold operation. The laws established in Sumer were not abstract philosophical concepts. They were practical guidelines for maintaining social order and productivity. The concept of kingship, for instance, was initiated by the Anunnaki. Kings were installed as direct intermediaries, human conduits to the divine. This wasn't mythology, it was governance. The tablets explicitly state that the scepter and the crown were lowered from the heavens, signifying the external technological origin of their political structures. But even with the rise of civilization, the core tension remained. The Anunnaki were fundamentally divided over the fate of their creation. Enki, seeing the potential of Homo sapiens, continued to impart knowledge, hoping to raise them above mere servitude. He taught them advanced agricultural techniques, how to refine metals beyond gold for tools and weaponry, and even subtle hints of their own genetic origin. Enlil, conversely, saw the expanding human population, now multiplying exponentially across the globe, as an uncontrollable infestation. He viewed their growing knowledge and their increasing audacity as a direct threat. The hybrids, Nephilim, were particularly problematic, demonstrating a vitality and ambition that defied the programmed limitations of the Lulu. The constant observation of these gods must have been terrifying and awe-inspiring for the early humans. The Anunnaki used technology that seemed like magic, flying machines described as birds of the sky, powerful weapons that could instantly destroy structures, the weapons of terror, and medical technology that cured ailments instantly. For the newly sentient Homo sapiens, these phenomena solidified the Anunnaki's status as true, literal gods, beings of immense power who controlled the forces of nature. However, the knowledge imparted was always selective. The Anunnaki were careful to avoid revealing the complete picture of their science, their home planet, or the true weakness of their mission, the dependence on gold. This intellectual rationing ensured that humanity remained dependent and controllable, never fully achieving the intellectual parity that might prompt a successful overthrow of their extraterrestrial masters. This era, the so-called Golden Age of Sumer, was not one of free human discovery, but one of rapid, subsidized development under strict tutelage. It was a civilization built on borrowed time and borrowed knowledge. This context is essential because it sets the stage for the dramatic climax of the Anunnaki's presence on Earth, the event that drove them to make the ultimate apocalyptic decision. The Earth itself was heading towards a cyclical danger. As Nibiru approached the inner solar system on its 3,600-year orbit, its immense gravitational field began to destabilize Earth's climate and tectonic plates. The Anunnaki were intimately aware of the catastrophic consequences of these close passes, having charted them for millennia. They knew a massive, cataclysmic geological event was imminent. Enlil seized upon this impending disaster as his opportunity to permanently solve the human problem. He argued to the council that the burgeoning, uncontrollable human population, corrupted by the hybrid bloodlines and emboldened by Enki's partial teachings, must be eliminated. The approaching natural cataclysm offered the perfect, non-attributable mechanism for global destruction. He proposed sealing the knowledge and allowing the coming flood to wipe the slate clean, saving the gold supply and the Anunnaki personnel, while extinguishing the unruly human species. Enki, the creator, found himself in a desperate ethical bind. He had engineered this species. He had allowed them to reproduce. He had developed an affection for the tenacious, if flawed, creatures. The idea of mass extermination of his own genetic project was repugnant to him, but the High Council, swayed by the political arguments of Enlil regarding control and the integrity of the genetic purity of Nibiru, voted in favor of the purge. They decreed a universal oath: the impending catastrophe would not be revealed to humanity. No warning would be given. The tension reached its zenith. This was a conflict between science and discipline, creation and destruction, setting the stage for the greatest climatic event in human myth and history. The narrative moves now from the halls of learned civilization to the impending terror of global destruction, a testament to the power of the approaching Nibiru. The ethical dilemma faced by Enki is deeply troubling. What would you do if you had created a species and were ordered to destroy it? Share your thoughts below in the comments. We must use every tool we have to spread this narrative, so please like and share this video with your community. The inevitable cosmic clock was ticking. Nibiru, the Anunnaki's home world, was hurtling towards its perihelion, the closest point in its 3,600-year orbit to the Sun, and consequently, its closest approach to Earth. The gravitational disruption was not merely theoretical, it was beginning to manifest in increasingly violent geological activity. Earth's magnetic fields wavered, tectonic plates groaned under immense unseen pressure, and the polar ice caps, already massive, began to destabilize dramatically. The Anunnaki High Command, primarily led by Enlil, began the meticulous process of evacuating their key personnel and, most importantly, securing the massive caches of processed gold. The operation required immense secrecy, adhering strictly to the Council's oath that no warning should be given to the human population. The sight of the Anunnaki meticulously packing their high-tech equipment and preparing their celestial boats to ride out the coming storm must have been deeply unsettling for the humans who observed them. yet they were kept ignorant of the true peril. Enlil's plan was cold, calculated and efficient. The approaching gravitational instability would trigger a catastrophic shift. The immense tide forces exerted by Nibiru would cause the polar ice sheet, which was significantly larger than today, to slide violently off the Antarctic landmass. This displacement would create an oceanic surge of unimaginable power, a global tidal wave, followed by centuries of atmospheric chaos and planetary instability. For Enlil, this was the ultimate, non-attributable solution to the human problem. But Enki, the scientist and reluctant creator, wrestled with his conscience. He had given Homo sapiens life, accelerated their minds, and now he was bound by an oath to let them perish. The conflict raged internally. He understood the strategic necessity of preserving the Anunnaki mission and adhering to the Council's decree, but he could not reconcile this with the inherent value he saw in his creation. The tablets reveal that Enki eventually broke the oath, not directly, but through a cunning, legalistic loophole. He decided to warn a single, favored human intermediary, a man known in the Sumerian texts as Ziusudra, and later in the Babylonian and biblical traditions as Utnapishtim and Noah. Enki could not speak directly to Ziusudra, as that would violate the oath. Instead, he approached Ziusudra's dwelling, a simple reed hut, and addressed the wall itself. He delivered the horrifying prophecy, the instructions for survival, and the precise specifications for building an ark, a submersible vessel designed not to float on the waves, but to withstand the immense pressures and turmoil of a global deluge. The instructions Enki gave Ziusudra were technologically advanced, not the simple carpentry described in later, highly simplified myths. The ark needed to be geometrically sound, leak-proof, and large enough to carry the seed of all living things, including livestock, plants, and crucially, Ziusudra's extended family, the genetic lineage Enki wished to preserve. This act of defiance was the ultimate betrayal of Enlil's command, but it was also the ultimate fulfillment of Enki's protective, creative instinct. He saved a remnant, ensuring that the genetic legacy of the Anunnaki intervention would survive the cataclysm. The description of the deluge in the tablets is horrifying. It was not a localized river flood, it was a cosmic event. When Nibiru reached its closest point, the earth shuddered. The great sluices of heaven were opened, referring not only to the subsequent torrential rains caused by atmospheric chaos, but more accurately to the immense gravitational pull ripping water vapor into the atmosphere and triggering tectonic shifts. The immense ice shelf slipped, creating the wave that scoured the surface of the planet, reshaping continents and extinguishing most life instantly. The Anunnaki themselves, viewing the catastrophe from their safe ships orbiting Earth, were not immune to the horror. The tablets describe them witnessing the destruction with profound distress, particularly Enlil, who was initially delighted by the fulfillment of his plan, but became horrified by the sheer magnitude of the destruction and the pitiful cries of the humans below. He saw his own creation, even the one he hated, being violently erased. The storm raged for days, then weeks, as the planet struggled to re-achieve equilibrium following Nibiru's disruptive pass. The Earth was fundamentally altered. The atmospheric pressure changed, the land masses shifted, and the climate plunged into a temporary violent ice age known as the post-deluge chill. When the floodwaters finally receded, exposing the muddy, devastated landscape, the scene was one of total destruction. Civilization, the rapid accumulation of knowledge, the very memory of the pre-deluge world was virtually obliterated. Only Ziusudra and his ark survived, carrying the fragile genetic seed of humanity and all other species. The aftermath of the Great Flood marks the definitive end of the Anunnaki's open, direct tutelage of humanity. They had witnessed the fragility of their environment and the near destruction of their gold source, leading to a massive reassessment of their operational strategy on Earth. The genetic experiment had survived, but the control structure had been irrevocably shattered. This moment, the Great Flood, defines our vulnerability and the sheer power of the celestial forces involved. If the Anunnaki were capable of surviving this event by leaving orbit, what does that tell us about our own relative technological status? Comment below, Diluvio Cosmico, if you believe this event was astronomical rather than purely mythological. Strengthen this investigation. Like the video and subscribe for more deep dives into forbidden history. The world that emerged from the Great Flood was utterly unrecognizable. The lush Eden had been replaced by a desolate expanse of mud and ruins. The Anunnaki, returning from their orbiting ships, surveyed the destruction and faced a sobering reality. Their gold mining operation, though surviving the storm, was in total disarray, and the carefully managed human workforce had been decimated. The discovery of Ziusudra, Noah, and his surviving family enraged Enlil. He realized his carefully planned purge had been thwarted by the subtle, compassionate betrayal of his brother, Enki. The confrontation between the two half-brothers, described dramatically in the tablets, was fierce. Enlil accused Enki of breaking the most sacred oath, of jeopardizing the security of Nibiru, and of allowing the corrupted seed of humanity to continue. Enki, however, stood his ground. He argued that the species had proven its resilience and, more importantly, that the surviving humans were essential for the immediate recovery and stabilization of the gold supply. The Anunnaki themselves could not sustain the manual labor required for the post-disaster cleanup and reconstruction. They needed the Lulu. The High Council, focused entirely on the existential threat to Nibiru, was pragmatically forced to agree with Enki. The immediate survival of the Anunnaki depended on the survival of Homo sapiens. This led to the post-diluvial agreement, a massive undertaking focused on reconstruction and the re-establishment of human civilization, but now under a much tighter, more restrictive set of rules. The initial focus was purely survival. Enki and Ninhursag took Ziusudra's family under their direct tutelage. They taught them advanced agriculture suitable for the new, harsher climate, how to domesticate the remaining animals, and how to utilize the fertile mud plains left behind by the massive flood. This period is the true reboot of civilization, where the Anunnaki acted as mentors, rebuilding the capacity of the species from scratch. However, the Anunnaki presence on Earth became significantly more remote. They maintained their command centers, now referred to as spaceports, and logistical hubs, like those later associated with Baalbek and the Giza Plateau, but they interacted less frequently with the general population. They established new rulers, the new line of kings, as absolute intermediaries, ensuring that the humans understood their place in the cosmic hierarchy. The most critical post-flood action was the prevention of humans reuniting and pooling their knowledge. The Anunnaki understood the danger of a consolidated, globally aware human population. This necessity gave rise to the story of the Tower of Babel. The tablets describe a period where the growing human population, driven by the ambition inherited from their creators, began to construct a massive structure, a ziggurat or shukudu, designed to reach the heavens, or more accurately, to reach the Anunnaki landing platforms. Their intent was to challenge, or at least gain direct access to their gods. 1. This was a clear violation of the established hierarchy, a direct threat to Anunnaki control. Enlil, still nursing his anger over the flood defiance, saw this as the ultimate proof of human corruption. He intervened violently. The tablets narrate the disruption of their communication and the scattering of the human population. The Anunnaki did not just physically destroy the tower. They fundamentally disrupted the shared linguistic foundation that Enki had initially provided, imposing diverse languages and dialects. This deliberate act of linguistic confusion served a crucial purpose. By preventing universal communication, the Anunnaki ensured that humans would remain geographically and conceptually isolated, incapable of mounting a coordinated global challenge to their authority. Evolutionary theory attempts to explain the emergence of diverse languages as a natural, geographically driven process. The Anunnaki hypothesis posits it as a deliberate, imposed barrier to prevent the sharing of high-level knowledge. The legacy of the Anunnaki intervention was now twofold. First, the gift of accelerated intelligence, defying Darwin, and second, the imposition of social and linguistic barriers, defying natural consolidation. This post-deluge period is also when the most baffling architectural marvels began to appear globally: the pyramids of Giza, Teotihuacan, and the precision-cut megalithic structures of the Andes. These structures share striking similarities: precise astronomical alignments, impossible construction techniques, and materials that often seem to defy the local geology. The Anunnaki proponents argue that these were not tombs or temples built by human muscle and copper tools. They were advanced technological structures, either massive energy conduits, global navigation beacons for the returning Nibiru, or highly sophisticated data archives, constructed under the direct supervision and using the technology of the Anunnaki engineers. The precision required to align the Great Pyramid to true north, or to cut granite blocks weighing hundreds of tons with laser-like accuracy, simply does not compute with the archaeological timeline. This knowledge, this engineering capacity, was either imparted or executed by the creators, further cementing the view that humanity was, and perhaps still is, living in the shadow of a forgotten golden age of extraterrestrial technology. The Anunnaki's influence receded, but their knowledge and the genetic legacy they left behind continued to shape human destiny, particularly through the establishment of highly privileged bloodlines who were entrusted with the fragmented remnants of the divine science. We are now deep in the final revelations concerning the hidden structure of our world. If you appreciate this exploration of the true origins of the pyramids and ancient technology, please take a moment to comment below with the phrase, "knowledge imparted." This helps us measure those who are truly invested in the journey. Like and subscribe now as we move into the haunting modern implications of the Anunnaki legacy. The most concrete, persistent piece of evidence supporting the Anunnaki's genetic intervention is found not in dusty tablets or massive megaliths, but within the very blueprint of human life, the genome. When we compare the human DNA to that of our closest primate relatives, the chimpanzees and gorillas, we find a startling discrepancy that conventional evolutionary theory struggles to explain fully, often resorting to complex statistical probabilities. The human genome has 23 pairs of chromosomes, totaling 46. The other great apes possessed 24 pairs, or 48 chromosomes. The standard scientific explanation is that, at some point in our evolutionary past, two ancestral chromosomes fused end to end, resulting in the reduced count seen in modern Homo sapiens. This fusion event is cited as a random biological accident that happened to provide a selective advantage, defining the split between hominids and the human line. The Anunnaki hypothesis offers a much more precise, non-random explanation. The fusion of the chromosomes is not an accident. It is the deliberate genetic signature left by Ninhursag and Enki in the House of Shimti. It represents the controlled editing of the hominid genome to accelerate intelligence while simultaneously limiting complete parity with the Anunnaki's own structure. The missing pair is the marker of the laboratory, the physical evidence of the Lulu's engineered creation. Furthermore, proponents of the Anunnaki theory point to the vast amount of human DNA that mainstream science once dismissed as junk DNA. This non-coding DNA, now increasingly recognized as crucial regulatory sequences, could potentially contain the complex genetic information inherited from the Anunnaki, the source of our abstract thought, our artistic drive, and our profound spiritual capacity that remains largely dormant or misunderstood by modern genetics. It is the silent, extraterrestrial code buried deep within our own cells, waiting to be deciphered. Consider the complexity of the intelligence leap. It is not just about tool use, it is about the capacity for complex symbolic language, mathematics, and philosophy. These are qualitative leaps that seem to bypass the natural, incremental progression expected of evolution. If an external, superior source of genetic material was introduced, material that contained the biological coding for high-level cognition, then the entire evolutionary timeline suddenly makes perfect sense. The rapid cultural emergence of Sumer follows logically from the rapid genetic acceleration provided by the Anunnaki. The Anunnaki's goal was resource extraction, but their methodology resulted in an unintended consequence: the creation of a species imbued with the curiosity and ambition of its highly advanced creators. This ambition, which led to the Tower of Babel incident, is what ultimately ensured the Anunnaki could never fully return to the previous state of total control. As the Anunnaki slowly withdrew from the physical stage of Earth's governance, they left behind not just physical structures and laws, but a powerful, pervasive mythology that endured through centuries. Every major religion, from the Sumerian and Babylonian epics to the Old Testament, contains clear, consistent echoes of the Anunnaki narrative: the creation of man from clay, genetic material, the presence of the Watchers, the Igigi, the conflict between the brothers, Cain and Abel mirroring Enki and Enlil, and the global flood. These stories, often simplified and repurposed over time to fit local, cultural, and theological narratives, maintain an astonishing core consistency regarding the creation event and the intervention of powerful heaven-dwelling beings. This suggests that the myths are not independent religious inventions, but fragmented historical accounts of the same foundational events. The theological implication is perhaps the most difficult for contemporary society to reconcile. If the beings worshipped as gods or angels were in reality highly advanced extraterrestrial technologists, powerful, yes, but mortal and driven by self-preservation, then the entire basis of theological faith shifts dramatically. It transforms divine power from omnipotence to technological superiority. It turns faith into historical memory of colonial contact. The final and perhaps most disturbing modern implication is the possibility of continued influence. The Anunnaki departed, or at least they departed the visible political stage, but they did not necessarily abandon their creation. Given the 3,600-year orbital cycle of Nibiru, the possibility of their return, or the continuation of their genetic oversight through proxy organizations, remains a persistent concern for many researchers. The bloodlines that Enki favored, the families who received direct instruction and knowledge post-deluge, are theorized to have formed the basis of later royal, priestly, and hidden elite societies. These societies, possessing the fragments of Anunnaki science and governance structures, could be the unseen architects of modern civilization, subtly guiding humanity along a path consistent with the original Anunnaki plan. This theory suggests that history is not a chaotic mess of human decision-making, but a carefully managed project designed to keep the workforce productive and contained until the next significant celestial event. This ongoing, subtle control is the ultimate defiance of evolutionary self-determination. If we were engineered, and if that engineering was merely for the utility of our creators, then our journey towards self-awareness is overshadowed by the question, are we truly free, or are we simply advanced biological drones whose operational parameters are managed by a hidden ancestral authority? The challenge presented by the Anunnaki narrative is not just an archaeological debate, it is an identity crisis for the entire species. It forces us to look at the evidence, the impossible speed of Sumerian knowledge, the genetic anomaly, the consistency of global mythologies, and ask whether the comfort of Darwinian gradualism is merely a convenient fiction, one that masks the staggering truth of our origins. The journey now must shift to how this knowledge, once possessed by the Anunnaki, could be accessed or replicated today, and what profound shifts in technology and understanding would result if humanity were forced to accept the truth that we are, in fact, the legacy of the stars. If this content has utterly opened your mind to the possibilities beyond traditional history, please comment below. Chige Ateofim, I made it to the end. This helps us understand who is truly seeking knowledge beyond the surface. Like the video, subscribe to the channel now, and activate the notification bell, because the next episodes will dive even deeper into the hidden bloodlines and the technology they left behind. And don't leave without clicking on the next video. It's the crucial continuation of this journey. The most terrifying realization stemming from the Anunnaki narrative is the vast, almost incomprehensible gap in scientific understanding between them and us. Even with the astonishing advancements of the 21st century, CRISPR, gene editing, quantum computing, and space exploration, we are still performing the equivalent of basic arithmetic compared to the Anunnaki's alleged celestial calculus. Their knowledge was not limited to genetic engineering. The tablets describe command over gravitational manipulation, atmospheric shielding, and inter-system travel, involving the intricate understanding of multi-body physics, dealing with Nibiru's complex orbit. These are areas that modern physics is only beginning to approach conceptually, often relying on purely theoretical constructs that defy current engineering capabilities. Take, for instance, the concept of the Shah, the 3,600-year orbital period of Nibiru. To successfully navigate and manage a planetary cycle of that duration, the Anunnaki must have possessed 1. Propulsion technology capable of sustained interstellar or inter-system travel, 2. Life extension technology to survive the journey, which could take hundreds or thousands of Earth years, and 3. A mastery of predictive astronomy to calculate the gravitational effects of their planet's long, erratic path. Our current space exploration models struggle to manage simple trips to Mars. The Anunnaki managed a fully contained civilization traversing the Oort cloud and returning systematically. Furthermore, the descriptions of their terrestrial technology, the power sources, the tools used for cutting and moving massive stones, the communication devices, point to a highly specialized, non-combustion-based science. The idea of using powerful focused energy beams, the firestones, to melt and move bedrock, a technology implied in the flawless joints of ancient megalithic structures, suggests a proficiency in harnessing plasma or directed energy that far surpasses anything we utilize outside of highly controlled laboratory settings. We use dynamite and diamond-tipped saws. They allegedly use something closer to molecular disassembly. If the technology was this advanced, why did they abandon it? The answer lies in the nature of their mission and the vulnerability of their home planet. Their knowledge was proprietary, reserved primarily for the survival of Nibiru. They brought what was necessary for the mission, mining equipment, life support, and genetic labs, but they likely did not share the core theoretical knowledge that allowed them to perform these feats. They were colonial engineers, not philanthropic missionaries. The residual knowledge, however, has had a profound, albeit fragmented, impact on human technological development. The rapid development of metallurgy in Sumer, the implementation of the sexagesimal base 60 mathematical system, which we still use for time and degrees, and the early charting of pharmacological compounds, these are all considered gifts from the Anunnaki, the operational manuals left behind for their proxy rulers. But these gifts are only fractions of the whole. It is like being given a complex smartphone without the knowledge of how to build its processor or program its operating system. Humanity inherited the results of Anunnaki science, not the underlying principles. This disparity explains the slow, frustrating path of human scientific discovery over the last few millennia. We are reverse engineering concepts we were never taught to create. The modern quest for extraterrestrial contact often assumes that any visiting race would be either benevolent, coming to guide us, or purely destructive, coming to conquer. The Anunnaki narrative introduces a third, more unsettling possibility: the extraterrestrial colonist driven by purely utilitarian needs. They were neither demons nor angels. They were scientists, miners and commanders following a brutal, self-preservationist agenda. This framework radically changes our perspective on humanity's place in the cosmos. We are not the favored children of a benevolent universe. We are a genetically modified asset in a larger intergalactic resource chain. Our greatest cognitive attributes, our complexity, our creativity, are residual benefits of that genetic manipulation, not earned evolutionary prizes. The defiance of evolutionary theory, therefore, is rooted not just in the past, but in the present. Every time a scientist studies the human genome and struggles to explain the chromosomal fusion, every time an archaeologist stands before a massive, impossible structure like Pumapunku, and every time we use the base 60 clock, we are witnessing the legacy of the Anunnaki's superior knowledge. This knowledge, which created us, simultaneously proves our evolutionary timeline to be fundamentally incomplete. The critical question now becomes, if this superior knowledge exists, and if it was only partially left behind with favored bloodlines, where is the full archive? Where did the Anunnaki hide the textbooks of their civilization before the deluge? The search for these hidden archives, the tablets of destiny, or the true repository of Anunnaki science, drives the core of contemporary esoteric and conspiracy research, suggesting that the ultimate knowledge, the master key to human history, is still locked away, perhaps deep beneath the Egyptian sands, or within the protected vaults of global powers. The mere existence of such advanced knowledge of genetic manipulation, intersystem navigation, and gravity control, challenges us to push beyond our current scientific paradigms. It suggests that many of the fundamental laws of physics and biology that we take as absolute may merely be approximations superseded by a more comprehensive galactic understanding possessed by our creators. The gradual withdrawal of the Anunnaki following the post-deluge stabilization created a power vacuum on Earth, but it was not a vacuum of knowledge. Instead, the Anunnaki selectively entrusted fragments of their science and governance to human intermediaries, establishing the blueprint for what we now recognize as global elite structures. This legacy, passed down through highly guarded bloodlines, is what ensures the continuity of the Anunnaki influence even in their physical absence. The crucial concept here is the priesthood of the stars. The most trusted human proxies were installed not merely as kings, but as high priests, the keepers of the Anunnaki's calendar, the interpreters of their celestial warnings, especially Nibiru's approach, and the enforcers of the Anunnaki's laws. These individuals were privy to secrets regarding geometry, astronomy, and even basic biological manipulation, knowledge that elevated them far above the common Lulu. This segregation of knowledge, the vast majority of humanity kept ignorant, while a select few wielded a fraction of advanced science, is the defining characteristic of the post-Anunnaki world. It explains the persistent global phenomenon of royal bloodlines claiming divine right to rule. That divine right was literally a genetic and informative mandate given by the extraterrestrial gods. The locations of the remaining Anunnaki technology also became centers of immense power. Sites like Giza, which Sitchin and others argue was a massive pre-deluge logistical hub and communication center, became sacrosanct. The knowledge required to maintain or understand these sites became the most fiercely guarded secret on Earth, passed down through secretive orders and religious organizations. The rise of what we now call secret societies or global cabals is interpreted by some researchers as the continuation of this Anunnaki-mandated governance structure. These groups allegedly possess ancient tablets, maps, and even functional remnants of Anunnaki technology. Their primary function, consciously or unconsciously, is to manage the human herd, maintain order, and crucially, ensure that the resources and the population are stable for the eventual return of their creators. This explains the recurring motif of the all-seeing eye, a symbol often associated with the Anunnaki commanders like Enlil, representing their constant surveillance and oversight of their creation. The pyramids and obelisks that proliferate in major capitals globally are not random architectural choices. They are symbols of allegiance to the ancient structures and power centers established by those who from heaven to earth came. The implication for the defiance of evolutionary theory is profound. If our species is still being managed by a hierarchy derived from a non-earthly intelligence, then our perceived free will and self-determination are severely limited. We are not directing our own destiny. We are following a script established millennia ago, designed to ensure our continued utility as a resource species. Think about the psychological impact of this truth. If humanity were suddenly presented with irrefutable proof of its engineered origins and its ongoing management by hidden proxies, the global social and psychological breakdown would be catastrophic. The entire edifice of self-made success and random chance would collapse, replaced by the chilling reality of being a controlled species. This existential fear is perhaps why the academic and religious establishments work so hard to discredit the Anunnaki narrative, choosing the comfort of the evolutionary status quo over the terrifying complexity of interventionist history. The cyclical nature of Nibiru's orbit introduces a ticking clock. If the Anunnaki return on their 3,600-year cycle, their reappearance would be the ultimate test of humanity's true evolutionary status. Would they find a species that has finally achieved intellectual parity, or one that has merely become more complex in its servitude? The preparation for this return is often theorized to be the underlying motive behind massive, globally coordinated efforts. From space exploration programs designed to track incoming objects to global surveillance systems designed to control the flow of disruptive information. The continued existence of advanced knowledge, hidden and protected by the modern custodians, serves as a constant, silent reproach to modern science. Every time we fail to solve a major problem, be it in clean energy, gravitational physics, or biological immortality, it highlights the knowledge deficit inherited from the Anunnaki. We are struggling to rediscover the answers that our creators possessed as commonplace operational facts. The narrative of the Anunnaki, therefore, is not merely a tale of ancient aliens. It is the ultimate cold case file of human origins, one that requires us to look beyond the accepted boundaries of science and history, forcing us to consider that the very core of our being, our DNA, our culture, and our social structures are products of an intelligence far beyond our own. The rebellion of the Lulu may have ended the industrial slavery, but the intellectual control maintained by the select few continues to defy our evolutionary independence. To further appreciate the magnitude of the knowledge gap that defies evolutionary theory, we must focus intently on the physical evidence that exists outside the textual records, the megalithic structures and the mastery of materials. The speed at which Sumerian civilization mastered metallurgy, moving almost instantaneously from crude copper to sophisticated bronze alloys, is a technological anomaly. While evolution suggests slow trial-and-error discovery, The tablets describe this knowledge as being imparted directly by the Anunnaki engineers, particularly relating to the mixing ratios and the required temperatures for smelting and casting. But the real mystery lies in the megalithic sites constructed both before and immediately after the Great Flood, particularly those in the Andes, e.g. Sacsayhuaman, Ollantaytambo, and Pumapunku. These sites present construction challenges that modern engineers, even with heavy machinery, struggle to replicate. The precision cutting of andesite and granite blocks, sometimes weighing over 100 tons, displays tolerances so fine that they suggest the use of advanced, non-contact cutting methods. Pumapunku, in particular, showcases the impossible geometry. The famous H-blocks are cut with such regularity and repetitive precision that they appear to have been manufactured using mass production techniques, possibly involving molds or advanced CNC, computer numerical control, machining. These blocks contain complex internal right angles and surface depressions that are identical across dozens of different stones. Such uniformity requires a tool far superior to copper chisels or even iron implements. The Anunnaki hypothesis suggests that these cuts were achieved using sophisticated sonic or vibrational technology, or even plasma cutters, tools that could precisely manipulate the molecular bonds of the stone without physical contact, leaving behind the signature smooth, flawless surfaces that we observe today. This mastery of material science and energetic manipulation completely defies the accepted chronological placement of these sites in human history. How could primitive, post-flood farmers suddenly possess the knowledge to execute structural engineering requiring tolerances finer than a sheet of paper? The knowledge was external. These structures were either built by the Anunnaki using their own equipment or built by their direct human apprentices, the Nephilim or favored bloodlines, using simplified versions of the Anunnaki's energy tools. The purpose of these massive stone structures was not necessarily utilitarian in the human sense, like simple homes or walls. Rather, they served as components in a larger planetary scale system, perhaps energy generation points, communication relays, or gravitational anchors for landing craft. The knowledge required to site, design, and construct these elements, knowledge of geomagnetism, planetary ley lines, and resonant frequencies, is fundamentally alien to the primitive human societies attributed with their construction. This is the definition of defiance. These physical relics stand as silent monuments, demanding an explanation that evolutionary archaeology is simply incapable of providing. They are physical proof that an external, technologically dominant intelligence intervened in Earth's past. We must also revisit the knowledge of celestial mechanics. The alignment of the pyramids at Giza and Teotihuacan, meticulously mirroring specific stellar constellations, like Orion's Belt, speaks to an astronomical knowledge that predates the supposed invention of the telescope by thousands of years. This was not mere stargazing. It was complex, time-dependent mapping that required generations of highly accurate observation, or more likely access to the sophisticated astronomical records of the Anunnaki, who, after all, relied entirely on orbital mechanics for their survival. The Anunnaki imparted only enough information to maintain the terrestrial infrastructure and track the critical signs of Nibiru's return. The human priests and kings, the privileged few, were the guardians of this celestial calendar. Their ability to predict eclipses, map the movement of the planets, and understand the precession of the equinoxes was the core of their perceived divine power, but in reality it was simply advanced data provided by their creators. The sheer volume of specialized, temporally displaced knowledge in genetics, metallurgy, physics, and astronomy constitutes the Anunnaki's greatest defiance of evolutionary theory. It shows that human progress is not a straight, incremental line. It is a series of dramatic external inputs followed by long periods of degradation and rediscovery. Our ancestors didn't invent this knowledge. They inherited it, struggled to understand it, and eventually lost vast portions of it, leaving behind only the mysterious, impossible structures that define our most perplexing historical puzzles. We have established the Anunnaki's knowledge, their technology, and their genetic intervention. But to fully understand how their existence defies evolutionary theory, we must analyze the moral and ethical framework they imposed, which dictated the nature of human existence long after their active presence subsided. Evolution assumes a survival mechanism dictated by nature. The Anunnaki introduced a system dictated by external control and engineered utility. The fundamental ethical conflict within the Anunnaki, the compassion of Enki versus the discipline of Enlil, was directly imprinted onto the human psyche and social structure. Enki's lineage represents the human desire for knowledge, creativity, and eventual self-governance. Enlil's lineage represents the imposition of hierarchical authority, strict law, and fear-based control. Human history, in this context, is the eternal struggle between these two extraterrestrial philosophies. This dual mandate explains the seemingly contradictory nature of early human culture. On one hand, you have the rapid invention of advanced mathematics and art, Enki's influence. On the other, you have the sudden rise of brutal kingship, slavery, and religious fear, Enlil's influence. Humanity was not allowed to develop a unified, coherent moral framework. It was forced to internalize the civil war of its creators. The manipulation of fear was a primary tool of control. By presenting their advanced technology as magic or divine power, the Anunnaki ensured obedience. Their unpredictable nature, shifting between granting prosperity and unleashing devastating floods or wars, instilled a deep, primal fear of the cosmos within the human collective unconscious. This fear became the foundation of all early religions, a mechanism to ensure compliance with the dictates of the gods. Evolutionary psychology often looks for natural mechanisms to explain religious impulse, the need for community, the fear of death, etc. The Anunnaki narrative suggests that religious impulse is, in fact, a manufactured response, a behavioral algorithm installed to maintain the authority of the technological overlords. We worship them because their technology made them appear omnipotent, and because disobedience meant swift, often mass-scale destruction. The concept of sin in many ancient cultures, for example, often aligns precisely with actions that jeopardized the Anunnaki's operational stability. Disobedience, attempting to acquire too much knowledge, or consolidating power, as seen in the Tower of Babel incident. The moral code was therefore not designed for human enlightenment, but for Anunnaki security. This external definition of morality is perhaps the most profound way the Anunnaki defy our understanding of natural evolutionary development. We were not free agents discovering ethical truths through societal development. We were operating under a highly structured, behaviorally modified mandate designed to maximize gold output and minimize organized rebellion. How much of our current social and economic structure is still a residual artifact of this ancient utilitarian agenda? The global reliance on currency, gold being the ultimate historical store of value, the persistent inequality, and the centralization of power in the hands of a few families, all of these elements can be traced back to the fundamental infrastructure established by the Anunnaki for resource management and labor control. If this is true, then our struggle for true democracy, equality, and peace is not just a fight against human corruption. It is a fight against a pre-programmed system of control, a legacy structure imposed by an alien intelligence whose only concern was its own survival on a distant world. The true knowledge that defies evolution is the knowledge that the very parameters of our biological and sociological existence were set by an external authority. This realization demands a radical shift in how we approach history, science, and even our own political movements. To achieve true independence, humanity must first identify and dismantle the foundational structures, both genetic and cultural, that were imposed during the Anunnaki's tenure on Earth. The legacy of the Anunnaki, therefore, is not just about genetics and gold. It is about the fundamental, ongoing conflict between a created species striving for freedom and the invisible strings of its highly organized, technologically superior creators. The next great evolutionary leap for Homo sapiens will not be biological. It will be the achievement of true, informed independence from its cosmic parentage. The Anunnaki's greatest act of defiance was not merely the creation of Homo sapiens, but the subsequent act of withholding and sealing critical knowledge, creating a permanent state of intellectual dependency that persists to this day. This sealed knowledge is the key to understanding why humanity appears so scientifically advanced in certain areas, like computer technology, yet remains tragically primitive in others, like sustainable energy and gravity control. Before the Great Flood, and during the final periods of their active rule, the Anunnaki initiated a project to preserve their most vital scientific data. They recognized that the planet might be unstable or that their return might be delayed, and they needed permanent, secure archives. These archives, according to esoteric interpretations of the tablets, were hidden in secure, technologically protected locations, not libraries, but massive subterranean vaults impervious to geological upheaval. One of the most frequently theorized locations for this sealed knowledge is the area beneath the Giza Plateau, specifically beneath the Sphinx or the Great Pyramid. Proponents suggest that the pyramids themselves acted as massive markers or power conduits, protecting the true entrance to a network of underground chambers containing the full history, physics, and genetic records of the Anunnaki mission. If this archive exists, its contents would instantly validate the Anunnaki narrative and simultaneously destroy all current evolutionary theories. It would contain the original lab notes of Nin-Hersag, detailing the exact genetic sequencing that created the Lulu. It would hold the precise astronomical charts of Nibiru and the other planetary systems. Crucially, it would house the technical manuals for technologies we only dream of: zero-point energy, anti-gravity propulsion, and complete mastery of the molecular structure of matter. The guardians of this knowledge, the elite bloodlines and their associated secret organizations, are believed to have actively prevented its discovery or release. Why? Because the knowledge itself is power, and the release of such information would empower the mass of humanity to achieve parity, effectively ending the millennia-old hierarchy established by the Anunnaki. The suppression of this knowledge has, therefore, been the single greatest break on human evolutionary and technological potential. We are forced to crawl toward discoveries that were solved millions of years ago because the solutions are locked away, protected by the remnants of the ancient ruling structure. Consider the history of physics and energy production. Humanity has struggled for decades to harness clean, abundant energy. The Anunnaki narrative suggests that non-polluting, highly efficient energy sources were commonplace for their civilization, necessary for powering their interstellar ships and massive mining operations. Yet human society remains deeply dependent on archaic, finite energy sources like fossil fuels. This technological blockage is not accidental. It is a controlled limitation, ensuring that global power remains centralized and manageable. The same suppression exists in medicine. The tablets describe the Anunnaki's mastery of biology, enabling them to extend their lifespans significantly, manipulate the genetics of entire species, and rapidly heal grievous wounds. This suggests a complete understanding of molecular repair and cellular regeneration, the keys to virtual immortality. Modern medicine, while brilliant, still battles the symptoms of aging and disease, treating the effects rather than curing the cause at the molecular level. The sealed knowledge, if accessed, would not only reveal our origins, but would instantly leapfrog humanity thousands of years in scientific development. It would initiate a new, true evolutionary phase, one driven not by natural selection or imposed control, but by universal free access to the most advanced scientific principles in the cosmos. The defiance of evolutionary theory in its final iteration is this: true evolution requires knowledge and freedom. The Anunnaki provided the genetic seed for evolution, but stole the knowledge required to fully realize it, replacing independent discovery with controlled selective dissemination. The quest for the sealed archives is, therefore, the quest for humanity's true intellectual sovereignty. It is the ultimate act of rebellion against the programming of our creators, and the only path toward becoming a truly self-determined, space-faring civilization. The Anunnaki influence is not just visible in ancient ruins or complex genetic code. It is woven into the very fabric of the modern human psyche and culture, creating subtle but powerful behavioral patterns that defy purely natural evolutionary development. Our intrinsic fascination with aliens, our collective fear of global catastrophe, and our simultaneous pursuit of both technology and spirituality. These are all echoes of our engineered and colonized past. If humans were engineered specifically for labor, a powerful work ethic and a sense of duty, often overriding personal well-being, would be genetically or culturally imprinted. This helps explain the profound, often obsessive nature of human work culture, particularly in highly industrialized societies. The drive to produce, to build, to structure society around relentless productivity could be a residual function of the Lulu's original purpose. We are still mining, but instead of gold from the Abzu, we are mining intellectual property, financial resources, and digital data. The pervasive nature of ancient alien theories in modern media is also highly significant. Despite academic ridicule, the public's fascination with the idea of extraterrestrial intervention remains incredibly strong. This enduring interest is not mere escapism. It is argued to be a collective, subconscious memory of our origins. The Lulu were created with the capacity for memory and narrative, and that ancestral memory, however distorted by time and myth, continues to surface in our collective consciousness, demanding recognition. The science fiction genre, in particular, often explores the themes of genetic engineering, tyrannical extraterrestrial overlords, and the discovery of lost, advanced civilizations. This genre is seen not just as entertainment, but as a contemporary method for processing and rehearsing the suppressed historical truth of the Anunnaki's presence. Furthermore, the persistent human pursuit of immortality and eternal youth, a scientific goal that seems to transcend mere survival instinct, could be rooted in the ancestral memory of the Anunnaki's long, possibly immortal lifespans. We are subconsciously striving to reclaim the longevity that was edited out of our genome when Ninhursag engineered the Lulu to be short-lived and self-propagating, ensuring a quicker generational cycle for the workforce. The cultural imprints left by the Anunnaki also inform our hierarchical political structures. The expectation that society must be led by a powerful, centralized authority figure, the king, the president, the supreme leader, is a direct carryover from the Anunnaki's imposed governance. They ruled absolutely, and human society, despite brief, idealistic attempts at egalitarianism, perpetually defaults back to a structure where power is concentrated at the apex, mimicking the rigid command structure of Enlil. Finally, we must consider the devastating history of human warfare. The Anunnaki themselves were often engaged in fierce conflict. The rivalry between Enki and Enlil, the Igigi rebellion, and the post-flood disputes over territory and knowledge. Human history is defined by endless cycles of violence, resource control, and territorial disputes, often far exceeding what is necessary for basic survival. This chronic conflict could be seen as a behavioral inheritance, the reflection of the warring nature of our creators. We are perhaps simply acting out the cosmic drama that defined the Anunnaki's time on Earth, unable to break free from the patterns of conflict woven into our history. The entire cultural and psychological landscape of humanity, therefore, acts as a living testament to the Anunnaki intervention. It is a subtle, yet massive defiance of evolutionary theory, suggesting that our deepest impulses, fears, and ambitions are not purely emergent properties of natural selection, but rather programmed or inherited traits from a superior, yet conflicted, extraterrestrial race. To achieve true evolutionary maturity, humanity must recognize these imprints, both genetic and cultural. The path to freedom begins with the brutal honesty of accepting that we were created and that the path we have followed has been largely controlled. Only by identifying the nature of the programming can we begin the difficult work of rewriting the code. The most pressing and terrifying implication of the Anunnaki narrative, the one that forces us to acknowledge their knowledge defying our timeline, is the cyclical return of Nibiru. If the Sumerian tablets are historical records and not merely mythology, then the 3,600-year orbital clock is a cosmic reality. This means the Anunnaki, or their proxy representatives, are aware of the planet's approach and its catastrophic potential. The timing of Nibiru's return is, naturally, a highly contentious topic, fraught with speculation. However, the core principle remains. The close passage of this massive body will once again trigger immense geological and climatic upheaval on Earth, similar to the deluge. If the Anunnaki are purely utilitarian, they would need a ready, managed workforce and secure infrastructure to sustain their presence and continue the gold operation during and after the catastrophe. This raises the chilling possibility that modern global events, massive, coordinated projects, the rapid centralization of governance, and the accelerated militarization of space are not random human initiatives, but preparatory measures for the next Shah cycle. The construction of massive deep underground facilities, DUMBs, deep underground military bases, globally, often under the guise of national security, takes on a new context within the Anunnaki framework. These may not be purely for surviving human conflict. They could be the modern equivalent of Ziusudra's Ark, designed by the elite custodians to shield themselves and key resources, including critical human DNA and technology, from the Nibiru-induced cataclysm, adhering once again to the Enlil-esque purge plan. Furthermore, the intense focus on tracking near-Earth objects and the continuous surveillance of the outer solar system by major space agencies could be subtly driven by the need to confirm the timing and trajectory of Nibiru. The specialized knowledge required to calculate such a complex, long-period orbit would likely be highly classified, held within the highest echelons of military and scientific intelligence, perfectly aligning with the concept of sealed knowledge. If the Anunnaki were to return, what would they find? They would find a species, Homo sapiens, that has followed their programmed trajectory almost perfectly. We have achieved high technological complexity, but remain deeply divided by the linguistic barriers they imposed. The Tower of Babel event. Tell me in the comments, do you believe humanity was engineered, or do you think the truth is even deeper than that? We have developed incredible weapons, reflecting the martial nature of their history, but have not yet achieved the fundamental scientific mastery of gravity or free energy that would allow us to truly challenge them. However, the one factor the Anunnaki may have underestimated is the true capacity for innovation and the rebellious spirit inherited from both the Igigi and Enki himself. Despite the genetic limitations and the cultural programming, humanity possesses an inherent unpredictable drive toward freedom and questioning, the true spark that defied Enlil's plan during the flood. The ultimate defiance of evolutionary theory And the Anunnaki's entire project would be for humanity to finally rediscover the sealed knowledge before Nibiru's return. Imagine the impact of accessing the complete genetic records or the full anti-gravity physics manuals. This would instantly equalize the playing field, allowing humanity to transcend its identity as the Lulu and confront its creators on terms of parity, not subjugation. The Anunnaki narrative is not just a warning of a past intervention, it is a profound call to action. It demands that we look beyond the accepted explanations for our history, that we interrogate the anomalies in our science and the contradictions in our mythology, and that we recognize that our greatest challenge is not overcoming natural adversity, but overcoming the constraints placed upon us by our own genetic architects. The existence of the Anunnaki and the knowledge they wielded utterly destroys the notion of humanity as a purely self-made product of chance. Instead, we are the product of design, a magnificent, flawed, and potentially rebellious work of art, awaiting the moment to finally seize control of its own brushstrokes and determine its own unprogrammed destiny in the cosmos. We have journeyed through the mineral desperation that fueled an interstellar journey, the genetic manipulation that birthed Homo sapiens, the cultural tutelage that accelerated civilization, and the catastrophic flood that reset the planet. Every step of the Anunnaki's presence on Earth, from the chromosomal fusion to the imposed linguistic barriers, stands in stark, undeniable opposition to the slow, random, and purely terrestrial process defined by Darwinian evolutionary theory. The knowledge they possessed was not merely superior, it was foundational. It provided the template for human biology and societal structure. Their knowledge defies evolution because they provided the answer to the missing link. The link was not missing, it was spliced. The remaining paradox, the open ending demanded by this narrative, is the question of the future. The Anunnaki narrative does not conclude with their permanent departure. It concludes with an impending return. The vast organized structures of modern global society, the highly centralized banking systems, the surveillance technologies, the space programs, can all be interpreted as the final stages of preparing for the Shah cycle. Are we, as Homo sapiens, still merely waiting to serve our creators, destined to mine and manage the planet until their ships arrive again? Or has the spark of independent thought, the genetic gift of accelerated cognition granted by Enki, finally pushed us to a point where we can choose a different path? The true evolutionary defiance lies in this choice. To accept the Anunnaki hypothesis is to accept the responsibility of our engineered nature and to fight for our ultimate independence. It is to recognize that we are capable of far more than we are currently achieving, and that the only thing holding us back is the deliberate suppression of the knowledge that created us. The search continues in the ancient deserts, beneath the megaliths, and most importantly, within the silent, powerful code of our own 23 pairs of chromosomes. The truth is there, etched in cuneiform and DNA, waiting for humanity to finally wake up to the knowledge that defies all we thought we knew.